we know that technology systems are getting faster and better. The question is, how do we make sure that the human systems is catching up as well?
Yeah.
They are as optimal, so we keep up with the pace. And that's the big question for technology firms and individuals who work with them.
Every single leader, every single manager, every single supervisor in the technology world needs to ask themselves that question. Say, what's my portion of responsibility for this?
Saurabh, Kamwa, welcome back to Basecamp.
Thank you.
Now, it has been a bit of time. We have been absolutely flat out, and it's really exciting because a lot of the work that we're doing has been in the technology sector. And for all three of us, we're flying all around the country, all through WA as well, working with so many wonderful people in tech, and it is an extremely exciting field. But something has popped up, and between all of us, we've been speaking about it, and it's this idea of burnout. And managing energy in so many different capacities is something that's extremely challenging, and we're finding it quite prevalent in the tech field. And I know one thing I was reflecting on recently is that when was the last time that I felt, even in my own life, that work was complete rather than on a temporary pause and there's all this stuff that I had to get back to. And that's something that just sits with you and it's on your mind all the time. And as I mentioned, in the tech sector, it seems to be more significant than a lot of other fields that we're in. So that's what we're going to explore today. There's so much to it, and hopefully for the listeners, they can learn a little bit more about what's actually happening under the hood, as well as learn some really great tools to help. Even though it's a challenging field, there is a lot that's in our control. Before we get into that, though, I think I'll throw to you, Sarah. Tech is exciting, as I said, and I'd love to hear from you. What draws people to working in the technology sector?
I think it's the realization that they're part of something huge. So I was talking to one of the chief technology officers, and he actually was saying, can you imagine what electrification did to mankind or humankind a few decades ago? And he said this AI transformation and digital transformation that people are working through is 4 times bigger than that. So I think innately people get attracted to something they're going to actually be part of something substantial and make a mark in their lives. It's like, you ask an architect and a building engineer, their work stays around forever as an imprint on land, right? This is not an imprint, but it's something that people will actually take with them for a long, long time. And that's the attractive part.
Yeah, it's interesting working with one of our clients recently. One of the general topics we were talking about was what are some of your ongoing frustrations? And we had about 10 people around the table, and I don't think I've ever had the experience where 50% or more said, I actually kind of get bored. That's what's frustrating to me right now, is that we're doing a really good job, we're making money, but I want to do something more exciting. And it's just an attraction almost of people that really want to be at the forefront of what's happening globally. Of course, you're attracted to the tech sector. Is there anything that you'd like to add to that, Kamwa?
Yeah, pretty much similar to what Sarah highlighted, that there's so much going on in the tech field and there's so much more to come. And there is a very healthy excitement for this uncertain future. So generally uncertainty can produce fear. But I think from what we see, there's so much more to come and we don't know what could it be. But in this case, it's more of a healthy, emotional realization we see about there's so much more I don't know. And that what drives me to be part of this.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I mentioned earlier, there are some patterns that have been showing up in our experience that it's almost two sides of the same coin. Like it can be really exciting. And as you mentioned there, it can also be a little bit anxiety inducing. And the excitement underneath, if we really look below the layers, there can be a cost to it if not managed appropriately. So I'd love to hear from you, Kamwa. What are some of these patterns that you've seen that are perhaps on the other side of the coin?
Yeah, listen, in our experience, when we spend time with these amazing human beings working in the tech sector, we see a series of patterns that emerge that essentially could derail the motivation and emotional well-being. And some of the things which we essentially see as a pattern is a lot of work is moving away from being technical to now adaptive. Now, previously, the technical work could be, how do we build system? How do we build software? Now it's moving away from that to more around, how do we navigate the minds and behaviors and motivations of different stakeholders, my team. And now that's complex stuff. So the complexity, navigating complexity, it takes a lot of energy. Over a short period of time, it's okay, but it's a continuous thing that that has an impact overall. That's a pattern we see a lot. We also see there is the individuals working in technology. They are operating in an environment where the half-life of knowledge is shrinking. There is so much for them to learn, unlearn, relearn on a continuous basis. And we see that now learning can be fairly energizing, as we know, when it's voluntary and when it's paced. However, at times in this industry, when it can be stressful at times when it's continuous and something you don't always have control, because the environment requires you to learn, unlearn, and relearn as a continuous basis. I was having some discussions with some of the um, clients and partners uh, around in this industry. And there's a paradox of flexibility, which is around, there's so much flexibility that individuals enjoy because of geographic locations they operate from. But there's a paradox to that. Once you have that flexibility, and if you're not regulating yourselves and there's no clear boundaries, essentially you're working 24 hours, seven days. There's no time, okay, now I do not take this phone call or a phone call or stop thinking. And that's a paradox, that these are some of the patterns we see that emerge often.
Yeah, there's no switch off button, is it? Once you actually enjoy that flexibility, there is no, like you said, there are no boundaries to say, well, I'm done. The phone's off, the email is off, but it's not. The brain's always switched on.
Yeah.
And they're constantly thinking about, like you said, these are not technical challenges, they're adaptive challenges. So your mind really wants to go down into lots of little nooks and crannies to say, what is going to take to actually influence these people in the right way? So a lot of people in tech, you're right, it's not the technical engineering that's fatiguing.
No.
It's how do we actually bring people on this journey of transformation, which is really draining, right? Because it's not natural. It's not something that our engineers in this field have been trained for. By and large, it's learned on the job, and some people have a capacity for it and capability for it, and others don't. And now they're thrust into this space, and they now have to work on this, and that really burns them out.
Yeah. Yeah. You're right, Sarah. And I think that also results with there's emotional labor of collaboration. There's an understanding. You will be working just not with your teams in front of the computer, doing fancy creative stuff. Now you are going to be working and collaborating with boundaries, or across the boundaries, with the clients, with your partners, with different teams within your organizations. There's a requirement. So there is some intensity and pressure that's part of the landscape. However, when it's not managed well, both by the system as well as the individual, that leads to potentially on track to burnout. And one of the things I remember when Sarah was talking, um, one pattern we often observe, especially when spend a lot of time with leaders and professionals in this, is this fragmented attention and shallow work. That a lot of time we see individuals and leaders, 70 to 80%, I would say, don't quote me on that, but that's my more gut feeling, work is shallow. Spend a lot of time on chats, internal chats, on Teams, emails, meetings, never-ending meetings. And if 70% of your day is consumed by that, so the real work that requires deep thinking generally is done later in the evening, on the weekends. So can you see all these things kind of interrelate, and as a result, we get off track.
Is that like if you're not careful during the day when you have meetings, most of the time spent on meetings is actually updating each other on what's been done and what hasn't been done, which is shallow work. It's like you're not solving challenges with focused attention or creativity or imagination. It's not. It's I hate to say it, but a lot of times it's posturing, right? It's posturing to say, look what I've achieved, look what I've done, or don't look here, look somewhere else, even. So I think a lot of time may have been spent on that rather than actually being creative and imaginative and looking out for solutions collaboratively, as you said.
Yeah.
But that's now done on when you're having a shower or you're on top of your stove cooking the family meal, perhaps.
Yeah, it's like when when you're sitting in your third meeting for the day and we're updating on updates. That's when you know it's not a good time. And then, as you say, you get to the end of the day when you want to be spending time with your family, you want to be going to the gym, you want to be actually out there enjoying. It's the middle of summer here in Perth, enjoying some sunlight, and that's when the creative work needs to be done, or the deep work, when often we don't have as much energy, right?
I think one of our clients or guests or whoever's listening needs to write a code that can analyze what quality of meeting you had. Was it just shallow or was it in depth? Right. So I think that would be, you just need an AI tool or algorithm to work that out.
Yeah. And I think a bigger question that I know we discuss amongst ourselves and often becomes part of conversations with our partners is we know that technology systems are getting faster and better. The question is, how do we make sure that the human systems is catching up as well?
Yeah.
They are as optimal, so we keep up with the pace. And that's the big question for technology firms and individuals who work with them.
That's a really good way of putting it. So we know tech is going faster and faster and faster. And one of the clients I had, they said their biggest stress point at the moment is that they literally just can't keep up with the systems. You learn one thing, the next one's out. You take 6 months to learn the next piece of technology, and that's now irrelevant again. But as you say, Kamwa, how can we keep the human system, if you like, updating and keeping up at the same time? And a really great lens. For those involved in tech anyway, we know systems and technology updates really quickly. How much time and effort are we investing in updating ourselves as humans? And that's a fantastic question, which almost sets the scene for what we're going to talk about today. Now, before we go deeper into some of these factors like the attention economy, the pace of change, and you've also got the systems versus individual side of it, I think it's probably worth defining what burnout actually is, and maybe perhaps what's the difference between I'm just a bit tired today versus actually experiencing burnout.
It's a really good question. I think that's in the tiredness and burnout is used interchangeably at times and can be pretty confusing when the definition is not clear. Then the management of that is less than optimal as well. Tiredness is, if I use an analogy, is like a drained battery, and burnout is when the battery is getting damaged.
Mm-hmm.
So, and tiredness is a natural physiological response of us working for an extended period of time. So and that could be out of excitement. So you're excited about a project, you're really excited about the innovation or wanting to help the client and the outcome, and you work day and night. Eventually you feel tired. Physically, you're drained. From a good night's sleep, from a rest, rejuvenation, a good holiday, the energy and motivation is back. When it comes to burnout, the burnout is essentially a chronic psychological condition, and it's when work-related stress is poorly managed or or it's prolonged. And World Health Organization, they essentially highlight burnout in a very similar fashion as well. Essentially, there are three very important aspects based on decades of research around burnout, Bobby, which have been studied by researchers Christina Maslach and Mike Lida. They clearly identify three aspects of burnout, which is one is emotional and mental exhaustion. You're just not tired. Your machine's been going on for a long time. That it's heating up now. So that's the first one. Then we have cynicism and depersonalization. Now we are psychologically distancing ourselves from our work, from our colleagues and our client. Generally speaking, we see the world from a lens that's less than realistic because of cynicism. Now, what's happening? The reason that cynicism may occur because the brain is beginning to conserve energy, and the best way to do so is psychologically distancing ourselves from those who could be triggering us. So that cynicism comes. And third is reduced professional efficacy, that I start believing that I can't keep up with this. I'm not able to do this. So when these three things specifically distinguishes burnout from a simple being tired.
Yeah, and just hearing that immediately, I'm thinking, gee, if I'm a leader here and some of my people, me included, are experiencing some of this from a pretty hard bottom line perspective, the impact is huge. Like if you're looking purely on productivity and the bottom line, how much money are people bringing in,
And the customer
and the
service
customer service.
and the attention the client gets. If the brain's kind of going, go away, I wanna distance from this, or I'm not, I don't have the confidence to take this through, and you then contrast that with the responsibility that inadvertently or deliberately we have put to our technology leaders to transform us through this period, right? It just doesn't make sense, does it?
No.
It's almost like this is what causes post-traumatic stress disorders. Like it is that stressful to say, if I'm feeling I'm responsible for this and I don't have, like you said, the professional efficacy, like I don't think I can do this, I haven't got the confidence, and my brain is saying this is going to eat me, go away, right? So I'm distancing myself, and I just don't have the physical or the emotional energy to work through this. These are three critical things that are
Yeah.
just fundamentally goes dead against what we want to achieve.
And I think if you can link that to what you're highlighting as a scenario, all these things I'm experiencing and the paradox of flexibility, which you spoke about, I'm working at home or from a cafe, and my leader and my colleague cannot see me go through that, and I'm alone to deal with it.
Yeah.
Can you see the cyclical impact on that? So now, in traditional ways whereby we catch up, like it or not, we can view, we can see, okay, something's wrong with this person. What's going on? Let's go for a coffee. Let's go have lunch. And while there's a lot of benefits around flexibility, that's one thing that's missed out, and that has a direct impact on burnout, or how do we respond to burnout in a social interaction.
And some of the conversations just in the last 2 weeks I've had, and I'm not going to just spice it up, but these are real examples, and we have to be really sensitive about these, is that we are human beings. These are human beings. Our partners in here are human beings. And like everyone, life happens to them. Some of them are single mums, some of them are single parents, some of them are working through lots of challenges outside of professional lives. And you add that into the mix, it's not a healthy mix, is it? We talk about psychosocial hazards. It's not a very healthy mix.
And when we do catch up on Teams or different platforms, we don't get time, effort, energy to talk about these things. It's enough for me to talk about technical updates and switch off until next meeting. So we miss out on knowing what's going on beyond life, work life, and there's a huge implication of how it can be a lonely existence if not managed effectively.
Yeah, and there's quite a few factors here that are coming up. You guys have both spoken about from an individual point of view, how are we managing ourselves and our energy? And at the same time, there's from a broader system, like what's actually happening here. So is burnout or even high levels of fatigue, is that a systemic problem? Or is it more an individual weakness? And or is it both?
Listen, it generally, the way we see it is a mismatch between the person and the system. And it's not, it's an interaction between both. It's not one or the other. And we speak about the 50%. What's the portion of responsibility? Is it system's fault, or is it a person not taking responsibility for what is within their control? And we see generally in our experience and what we hear, what we observe, it's a mix of both. Essentially, when we see, um, it's not a weakness on a person's part. As I said, it's a mismatch between the person and the environment, and how they perceive the environment and how the environment expects from them as well. There are essentially 6 areas where this mismatch can occur, and we see this again and again. One is when the workload is, the pressures are more than the capacity, our internal capacity. Um, and secondly, when there is limited autonomy. The autonomy is a core psychological need we all have. And when that's reduced, so that's where it becomes a bit challenging. We have a reward of efforts. If the reward is not aligned with the efforts of individuals and the groups and the organizations putting in, and then also it is a factor as well. We have the community and the relationship, as we
Mm.
spoke about just then. If they're not as
Yeah.
strong, and that has an impact as well. And the sense of fairness we see when things are perceived as unfair, and the values alignment. These are some of the things when there's a mismatch between what the system is providing, environment is providing of the tech firms, and how the individuals are responding to that.
Yeah.
That could lead to, are we on the trajectory of being in a burnout zone now?
Yeah, and I think probably um, I'm going to challenge how we pose that question,
Yeah.
right? Instead of saying, is it a systemic, structural, organizational issue
Mhm.
that the employer needs to take care of the health, well-being, psychosocial safety of the employee, or is it fundamentally an employee worker issue saying, hey, you need to turn up fully fit for your role? I think if we flip it and say, what's my portion of responsibility that I bring to this relationship or this marriage, rather than a mismatch, we call it this marriage of me being able to provide the best I can for the fulfillment I'm going to get in this journey of digital transformation. And same from an employer perspective to say, what am I going to bring to this marriage that actually allows for my team, my people to actually perform at their best?
Yeah.
What's the platform I can bring to it? So I think it's a serious question for contemplation for lots of organizations, and have this adaptive conversation to say, what's my portion of responsibility that I bring to this? As long as we can find um, the commonality of the goal. Like I was just thinking while you were talking, Kanwa, that in amongst all of these things that are missing often, right? How long can an individual last until they start to forget about the excitement and the fulfillment, right? It will only go that far until people just go, you know what, I'm done. I'm done. I don't find that excitement anymore. I'm not conscious of it when I wake up in the morning that this is what my goal is. This is what I get to do. And it becomes, oh my goodness, now I have to do this and I have to do this. They forget about I get to do this. Yeah. So I think that's a failed marriage. Um, that we need to actually not we, every single leader, every single manager, every single supervisor in the technology world needs to ask themselves that question. Say, what's my portion of responsibility for this?
Yeah, I love that framing. And I'd almost like to apply that. What is my portion of responsibility to some of the aspects that we've spoken about already, and particularly what you just mentioned there, Kamar, in terms of the 6 factors. And the first one really stood out to me as encapsulating it from a like, what is my portion of responsibility when it comes to helping increase my capacity to deal with the forever evolving demands. And that is such a key focus area for what we want to talk about today. And even better than me just asking how do we work with this capacity, or even better, if you want to talk to what impacts the capacity and what brings it down, is then leading to eventually for our listeners to hear what is my portion of responsibility where I can help increase that capacity.
Yeah, I think that's a question is something which, as Sarah said, has to be asked by everyone, by the professionals as well as the leadership. Um, and as a leader, how do I provide an environment
Mm.
that the capacity people bring with them is not drained out easily? And secondly, how do I create an environment and lead so they are rejuvenating their capacity? So when they turn up tomorrow morning, they have so much to give for themselves, for their teams, and for the business. And at the same time, um, for an individual to as we're discussing to have similar view as well. What's my portion there? The capacity when it's not aligned with the pressures and what's ahead of what's in front of me, then there's some serious impacts. There's cognitive impact, there's emotional impact, there's essentially physical impact as well at an individual level, at a group level, and then eventually lead to organizational level. The human ERP, as we say, the engagement, productivity, and retention, it starts to um, crack and weaken. So if the capacity is not matched with the pressure, then at a cognitive level, we find ourselves distracted, frazzled. Our decisional quality seems to suffer as well. And at an emotional level, we find ourselves irritable. So if you ever observe those meetings where the capacity is people have had either if they've had lunch, they're having lunch in their on their desks. One are running from one meeting to another and spending most of the day reading emails and chats. And this is only at work. And as Sarah mentioned, things were outside of work as well. Imagine the emotional impact on that. How do I feel?
Mm.
And how do those feelings drive my behaviors and response, especially when I'm challenged? And there's the emotional aspect, and then the physical aspect of the impact of reduced capacity is essentially on my sleep pattern and long-term sleep pattern, which is not effective, has a huge impact on how we show up, but not only that, on our physical well-being as well.
Yeah, so like there's a number of elements that you talk about that contribute to capacity here, and they seem to be all interrelated. And one framework we love to talk about is, to put it simply, the PEMS framework, which is stands for PEMS. So physical, you mentioned there, Karma, where we're talking about sleep, nutrition, even breathing, which gives us the ability to exist and perform and think and move. You've got emotional energy, which you mentioned there, that how easily do we get triggered? Um, Mental energy, which is the capacity to focus for extended periods on one thing at a time. And then there's a fourth factor, which we haven't quite touched on properly yet, but it's the spiritual energy. And the spiritual energy you did mention there is a sense of meaning that you derive from what you do. And those four factors of physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual, they build up our fuel tank, if you like. So those four build up our fuel tank, which give us capacity to deal with the external demands. And immediately as you were talking through those, that question again of what is my portion of responsibility, now we're starting to look at a framework that can actually help Like we can do things in each of those domains that help us deal with these external pressures that come about. And what I'd love to do is almost look at, there's two things. One is the attention economy. So when we're constantly, where people can reach us all the time, right? So our phone is on, the laptop's on, Teams is on, we go home, you leave everything on again, and there is just a constant reachability at the moment. And the second thing is that when we are at work, we're constantly switching tasks, right? So there's a mental part of the switching tasks, and there's the emotional part of, I need to be able to give to others, and now you trigger me, and how well can I regulate myself? And I guess my question to you, Kamwa, first is, what is the psychological cost, or how does this impact the brain of constant reachability or needing to constantly switch tasks all the time?
Yeah, that's a good question. If the environment requires me to switch my task, switch my attention from one thing to another, there are two things. One is the environment is requiring me to do, or maybe I'm perceiving it to, or maybe it's not. I am doing that. Now, regulating our attention, it's a capacity, and sometimes the environment does require us to. For example, I've got emails flowing around and people expecting me to reply straight away, and chat box coming, and I've been invited to different meetings. So my mind's, and then I'm getting phone calls and texts from home. And then I've got reports to manage. And while I'm managing reports, then there's something else happens, and last minute requests from. So as you can see, the environment is now requiring me to bring my attention away from one thing and one thing only to many things. So the brain, as we know, is not wired to switch our attention to one thing to another all the time. It can do that, but the outcome of that is our cognition, our thinking capacity is impacted. Our quality of work is impacted as well. And as a result, so there's a reorientation from, so that when I'm focused on task A and I move to task B, so my brain has to pause task A, the thinking, and reinduct myself to task A. And while I'm there, I get back to task A or maybe task C. So there's a lot of reorientation I'm going through. Now that as an expense of energy. So the energy which I should be using to do the deep work now is pretty much being frazzled just by doing that. And that's a real adaptive challenge that is faced in this industry, both by the environment. There's so much going on, and at the same time, if I don't have the capacity or courage to say no, and that also amplifies the situation.
Yeah, we talk about this framework around what's our switch cost, right? So when we're switching from a task A to task B, our focused attention, by the time we actually get to where it needs to be, there's a cognitive load, and B, a lot of time that's spent unnecessarily, which gives birth to that shallow work that we talked about also. But I think what we haven't paid attention to, and has crept into our work culture, is how easily we get distracted. And I think another formula that we've used to describe performance, we say performance equals potential minus distractions. So part one is, of course, how do we build our capacity? But I think we should also talk about part B, which is, well, how the hell do I reduce my distractions? Because if I'm not able to sustain any amount of focused attention, and yes, of course, some of these are out of my control. These are external to within my environment, but external to me, that are distracting me. But I'm going to actually push the question out to our listeners and say, well, truthfully, if you really think about it, how much of these are your own internal distractions caused by your own habits, your impulses, your lack of self-control? And of course, there are some biological reasons for, we know people on the autism spectrum and people, who have diagnosis for ADHD and so forth. Outside of that, are there things we can do for ourselves that will help us sustain that mental focus that you called, or even the ability to actually really dial up our emotions to a level? Yeah, and I think that's an important question to ask. But again, like Bobby, you said, it's all predicated on a background of reachability,
Yeah.
right? We have the mixture of how often and the channels you can reach me at any time of the day. I feel I need to be there for everyone, and therefore this notion of rest is often pushed to the weekends, right? Where you should be spending that quality time with your family. Or worse, it's pushed back to, when I have a holiday, then I'll rest. And we're missing the point, like you've said, the difference between a tired person and a exhausted burnout person is the quality of the battery. Are you just drained that you need to recharge overnight, or you're damaging your battery where now you're going to have to send it out to repairers? I think that what Kama actually used the analogy beforehand, right? It says, what are we actually doing to our battery? So this reachability, this concept of reachability, has actually crept in, right? Without us going, for whatever reason, right? But it has crept in. So we feel responsible to be there and responsive, and we've also, because we don't turn up to work and turn off work, that also dilutes the boundaries as well. But I think what we have to be mindful of is, in the end, what appears to be is that individuals and organizations end up in a way that, the period of rest, as we call it, is not a nightly rest, right? It's, I'll get it on the weekend. Worse, I'll get it when I go to Bali. I'll have a few days off, or I'll have a holiday. So I don't think that works. But it is a problem that we have to take responsibility for at both ends, right? But I'm just highlighting that's definitely what has come to our observation in and around the communities that we serve in technology.
Yeah, so like I really like how you talk about, are we draining the battery or are we actually damaging the battery here?
Spot on.
And that's a really key distinction, as Kamal mentioned earlier, in terms of there is a responsibility both ways here. So I just want to make sure we highlight this, that with the capacity, we've talked about the energy capacity with all our different domains, and specifically with switch cost, we're talking about the mental capacity. That's not entirely just on the individual. There is something the individuals can do to help. As you mentioned, we can train ourselves to be better at working out, how do I not respond to everything? How do I not have my phone sitting here and my laptop sitting here? There are definitely things that we can do on an individual point of view, and there's an organizational responsibility to health. So our batteries are going to be drained. It's part and parcel of existing as a human, but they don't need to be damaged. And that's where we want to get onto, well, what do we do about it? How do we stop them getting damaged? Right.
Yeah, and I think that's the conversation, right? Where we want to be able to share with our listeners what are some of the things that I can do as a leader of an organization, and what I can do as an individual being part of an organization. Again, it just goes back to what we actually discussed here earlier, that it is a joint responsibility.
Yeah, I'd really love to go into this because this is the gold dust for listeners, right? So, Kamal, if I can throw to you from perhaps, do you want to start with an organizational point of view? What can leaders do? What can organizations do to help with these themes that we're seeing?
Yeah, I think this is where, let's use the value of simplicity. Let's not overcomplicate this. From my point of view, what organizations and leaders essentially there are four things that leaders could essentially begin to start navigating or transforming a culture whereby the capacity is rejuvenated. Now, uh, we in the field of adaptive leadership, adaptive work, we come across this framework of uh, are you on the balcony or are you on the dance floor? So every now and then, as leaders in tech firms, we invite them to come off the dance floor and be on the balcony. So when we're in the dance floor, we pretty much in the nitty gritty in operations, meetings, coordination, budget, updates, which all is very important. But to navigate the challenges we're discussing right now, when they come on the balcony, they start taking a helicopter view. Okay, what is going on? How is I can see that you're not managing and regulating yourselves. How are we or the system inadvertently, without meaning to, contributing to that? So there's a part that I want to have a discussion with you, how you could, maybe we can provide you with some knowledge and frameworks and reminders that you can do for yourself. But let's make sense. So sense making becomes very important here. So at a very simplistic level, what has worked really well to um, commence this dialogue. Essentially, it's a dialogue, sense making, whereby leaders can look at four things around how do we review the energy expenditure and the work design. That's the first thing. How do we go about give permission to ourselves to say yes and or no, to prioritize? How do we go about reconnecting the work to the bigger purpose and sense of spirituality, as you mentioned? And lastly, how do we protect our collective cognitive focus? Now, if these become the four themes, imagine if for each one of these four themes, to protect these themes, to optimize these four themes, imagine leaders take their teams out from the dance floor and sit on the balcony and make sense, have a dialogue. And for each one of those things, um, asking questions like, for example, in the theme of aligning energy with the work design, 3 or 4 questions where leaders and teams can navigate, which is, where does most of our energy go during the week? Let's have a discussion. Now, that's a very different conversation to give me an update.
Mm.
Which activities genuinely move the product or system forward, rather than what do we need to do to get this out of the door?
Yeah.
So let's identify what are some at a minimal, and are we doing more? Are we doing extra, which is unnecessary? So let's have a discussion around that, and what work creates motion, but not real progress. What are we doing that's habitual or part of the old processes, which we are subconsciously, without thinking, utilizing, or maybe unspoken rules, which let's talk about them and get rid of them if possible. And how do we, which meetings or processes could we shorten or eliminate? And how do we go about managing the days collectively where we do deep work and we allocate some time now for shallow work? Imagine if leaders having this adaptive conversation every now and then you get back onto the dance floor, do the work. So that's the first thing. Is similarly around the purpose. Imagine if leaders can have a discussion around who benefits from our work. Let's have a, and Sarah and I, we work with an organization, and one of the leaders, he's pretty effective in having this dialogue. I know we're disgruntled, we are under a lot of pressure, we are misaligned, but let's park all of that and let's look at who is benefiting from this work. Is it the elderly, or the children, or is it people in hospitals? And what risk or harms are we preventing for them just by doing what we do day in, day out, even though it's frustrating us? And how can we regularly remind ourselves of the value we are creating whilst we are dealing with all the ups and downs? And So these kind of questions around each one of these four themes around how do we protect our cognitive focus? How do we reconnect to purpose? How do we prioritize our permission or create essentially permission to say no or yes when it's required? And how do we review the alignment between the energy expenditure and the work design? It essentially becomes a tool for leaders to catch up and separate to the update meetings, and we call them as adaptive meetings. I think having a dialogue, sense-making dialogue with the teams who are dealing with this, it's a good start.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, right? Where we think that would go a long way in clarifying the purpose again for individuals, and then instead of just being busy, we can be effective. But if I truly empathize with our clients, right, who, like you said, sometimes they're responsible for running critical infrastructure, be it airports, be it banks, be it financial staff, be it hospitals, be whatever that is, right? And they cannot afford for any interruptions to that critical infrastructure. That's scary stuff. And where every single hour, every single individual in their mind is invested in what they think is moving the dial. But it's not moving the dial. It's just creating more busyness, right? To then, like you said, it's the permission. I think it's the emotional permission that an organization or a leader needs to give themselves to go, I'm actually going to really slow down before I have to speed up again. I think that I reckon is a mystery to solve. Is as a manager who's responsible for allocating, for some reason we're still in that space, aren't we? To say effective use of resources. How many times do we get asked for that? Like, what's your utilization rate? Right? All those things. People are busy doing stuff, but are they doing the right stuff? Well, I don't have time to ask that question yet. But I'm just making sure that everyone's busy and we think it's right, because again, I just go, well, what if it doesn't come off? Right? And there's a real fear that leaders will hold. I think we need to actually contemplate on what will give the confidence to our leaders in these organizations to say, hey, I need to step back and do some sense making, is the word Kama you used, to go, is this really moving the dial? Is this really effective? Who is it beneficial for? And the questions that you asked were very important questions to ask.
And one of the, Sarah, one of our partners in technology, we had a dialogue with them and their client together. So, because as the organization they're very courageous organization, and they wanted to have, okay, how do we become vulnerable and invite a client to talk about how can we optimize, and we're supporting them to have that dialogue. So essentially, a large part of that dialogue will be technical updates and Gantt charts and all those things. But both the client and the technology firm we are serving, they spend good amount of hours just navigating or sense making questions around specifically the client and the organization. They deliberated on questions around how often are we switching tasks during the day. How am I contributing to your task switching as a client? And what are you doing for us as well? And what interruptions break our focus most frequently? And when do we have protected time between ourselves, which is more deep thinking as opposed to just updates? And essentially, what changes would allow us to concentrate on more complex work as opposed to just technical? Now, we spend good an hour and a half on having this dialogue. And that's something it was very cathartic in many ways because things that came up that allowed them to view, all right, okay, so that's where I can reduce the energy intake and use the energy to do looking for myself or do deep work as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, isn't that a novel idea, Kenma? Where the client tells our technology partners and asks the question, how am I impacting you? What am I doing to reduce your effectiveness?
That's a very progressive way of working between a contractor. You think about it, isn't it?
Yeah. Usually these contract negotiations, there's an invisible baseball bat on the table. If you don't follow through, I'll whack you on your head with it. But well, let's get and you're right. We've done some of our best work that we've done actually in that space is where we've actually involved the client and the technology partner to work together and actually really have that space to listen deeply with some a level of vulnerability, acceptable vulnerability, and adequate vulnerability to go, well, this is what scares me.
Mm.
And both parties can orient themselves to the goal and, have that congruence on that and say, okay, I can help you by this. And that's structurally what a leader needs to take responsibility of, right? Just because otherwise they're exposing their team members to more and more hazards. Right. So structurally, that is something that we can do. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, it's that's really fascinating, Cameron, and particularly bringing people together. Like if we zoom right back out to what we wanted to talk about today was this common theme that we're seeing of burnout in the technology industry, right? Because it is an exciting field. It is moving really quickly. We're always available. The people that work in it are often really passionate and they have an identity around, well, I really love what I do. I am the type of person that does a really good job. And if they're not delivering on that piece, now you're like, oh, what am I going to do? I'm going to work harder. I'm going to work weekends. I'm going to work evenings. And it's not just what I'm hearing from you both. It's not just up to that passionate individual to stop getting distracted. There is a portion of responsibility there for sure, but there's something that's a lot deeper and that can be done as a team. And even better, some of those questions, which we can put it together and provide a tool in the show notes for the listeners, is that just listening to some of the topics and questions that you're talking about there, Kamar, is that they ticked off a lot of the key components in terms of autonomy, connection to the people around you, fairness, value alignment. Like a lot of the key themes to help prevent the battery getting damaged as a team coming together and having these conversations. One, we're more connected with each other at an adaptive level, not as a tick box update, technical, shallow level. You're giving the team autonomy. How can we do this better? Do you have ideas? And another piece there is, I think, the status piece, where we're giving the team, by sitting down and getting on the balcony rather than just being on the dance floor, like, hey, your thoughts and perspectives are really important to us here. Let's work together to help maybe not solve this problem, but adapt, because that's the main thing here, right? When we're talking adaptive conversation, the whole point is to adapt.
And I think, Bobby, it's an important thing for us to highlight here. Adaptive challenges can only be dealt with when the people who are contributing to them are sitting across the table. Unlike technical challenges, we can delegate or we can get someone else to do it for us. And that's why seeing examples of client and the contractor working together is pretty much how it's supposed to be done. And I think at an individual level as well, as we discussed, there's a portion of responsibility that one of the things we know, maladaptive perfectionism can come in the way. And there's a good amount of research. There's a Australian psychiatrist, Gordon Parker. I think he's done a good amount of research around burnout and how our need for being perfection beyond than what is supposed to be, more maladaptive, has a huge impact on our burnout as well. And not having the boundaries between how much responsibility I need to take versus when do I delegate. And I think that's something we see a lot when leaders and professionals, they rather do everything by themselves because there's a fear, unknown fear that if I don't, bad things may happen. And then we say that if we don't delegate, then we're not allowing others to become experts because we often say experts were once a beginner themselves. So there's and one very important thing, which is something that we've been discussing a lot with our clients around their strong identity attachment to work. That when we as an individual, when our work becomes the primary source for our self-worth, we define our worth based on what I do, my title on my business card, then we over-invest emotionally. And anything that's not going well reflects on my identity or lack of. So at an individual level, these are some of the things we need to navigate as well. And yes, organizations, we can support individuals to have dialogue around these things. Let's share awareness around these things. And in addition to how can we readjust some of the systems we operate in, how can we invite individuals to also think about what are some of their part themselves they're subconsciously operating that's not helping them as well.
And I think there's a lot. Look, I'm going to throw the question back at you, Bobby, because I think there's a lot in that space we can learn from a professional sports arena. How professional athletes they take their individual portion of responsibility, like outside of what we were talking about earlier was the organization and the manager and the leader taking responsibility. At the individual level, the individual athlete also takes their portion of responsibility. I think there's a lot you can actually share with us and what you and your colleagues in the professional sports space do as well.
Yes, it's interesting you mentioned that, Sarah. And earlier you spoke, it was a very small line you said, but I immediately connected to it where it was around when you wake up in the morning and I have to do this, or I've got to go to work, I've got to get all this work done, I've got to have all these meetings. And the simple perspective shift of changing one letter and I got to I get to, and I get to go to work and I get to, one of the things that's been very true for me from a professional sport point of view is now when in the middle of my career, it was definitely, I've got to do this, I've got to do this, I've got to do this. And then you get so distracted by all of the things that are around you. And it's like, oh, we've got to travel now. And I've got to sleep really well. And I've got to eat this. And now I'm getting all these abusive messages on Instagram because I got out for a stupid shop. But now I'm like, gee, I get to go to training today. Or I get to tipples. I get to get these messages in a way. It sounds a bit crazy, but that is a critical part as an athlete that you have to take individual responsibility for, because there's actually so much you can blame from an external point of view that an athlete there's nowhere to hide for us.
Yeah.
So we are out there. I think that's the difference, the key difference between corporate and sport. Definitely in corporate, your output is visible. However, it is not all the time, every single time you go to work, there is a ticker across next to your name, and that's it. And everyone's watching. So you're so visible, you have no choice but to take individual responsibility.
Yeah.
I will say at the same time, I certainly had my battery damaged over the years by not having an environment that did a lot of sense making. So what Kamwan mentioned is really important. I think I said it the other day, the water that you're swimming in is extremely important. So if you have a pond and the fish kept dying, you can't expect each individual fish to fix themselves. You have to look at the water.
Spot on.
And I think that's what the sense-making conversation does. But at the same time, to your question, if you're the fish in the pond, there is so much that you can do to help yourself. And if there's one key thing, there's two key perspective shifts from my point of view that anyone, whether you're into sport or not, can take. One is I get to instead of I got to. And the other one is to, like, curiosity and anxiety can be two sides of the same coin. So acknowledging, yeah, this is hard. Bring it on. How can I work this out? So it's that abundance mindset of this is hard. I am struggling. There is so much going on. Bring it on. What can I do to adapt? And that I think having those two mindsets, which are helped by the environment that you're swimming in, make a huge difference.
Yeah, it's almost like taking responsibility for, and I just use the same phrase that you've used from a sporting perspective. So now my team is the community that I serve, right? So I get to be on the helm of how we navigate through these treacherous times with the digital transformation. We keep hearing about, AI is coming and it's going to just be very disruptive, and all those sorts of things are going to fundamentally change how we work and how we integrate and how we, do our work as such. So at the organizational individual level, we say the frame to adopt is, I get to help my community through this, because as a technology expert, if I've got anxiety around how I'm dealing with this, imagine mere mortals like us who are not in the technology sector. And we're looking at them going, that's yours, my friend. You have to help us out. How do we do this? And they're a force multiplier of our emotions in that sense. If they've got anxiety, well, we're almost panicked, right? So that is the sense of responsibility that they get to enjoy, and finding again that what you all said this morning was that fun, the passion, the attraction in the first place, almost childlike wonderment to actually just go, I get to play with this.
Yeah.
And I am the best person amongst this group to help us navigate through that.
One of the things is very important for us to highlight in this forum, especially for our leaders, for our listeners, especially those who are leaders of technology organizations, is to acknowledge that we human beings are soft, mushy marshmallows. We may wear this suit of ego and we come across as know-it-alls and want to prove that, we're strong and all those things. But inside, we are all vulnerable. We are soft. We have fears. We have aspirations. We have needs, psychological and otherwise as well. And one of the core psychological need, which often we see there's a missed opportunity in technology sector, not by intent, because of the nature of flexibility and working from all different cross metrics environment, is missed opportunity for leaders and anyone else to acknowledge the presence of the other person. It's not saying good on you for completing the work. It's about, I acknowledge your presence. I acknowledge you as a human being. Or I'm calling just to say hello. I'm not calling for an update. I just want to see how are things. And when was the last time we caught up for a coffee? And that's it. Not saying that and say, oh, by the way, can you also send me the report? Because then it comes across superficial. So I think there's a huge missed opportunity because we're not sitting next to each other and as we used to in the traditional ways. How can leaders can deliberately, consciously connect either on Teams, on the phone call, or where possible face-to-face every now and then, and just connect? And this need is very important because I was speaking with a very credible professional in this field, and he shared with me his sentiments. And I think, Bobby, I shared the sentiments with you. If you could share that, because that's a very deep way of expressing that. What is the result? How do we feel when this need is not being unmet?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a poem that was shared with you, and it's extremely powerful. So I'll go ahead and read it. And it starts with, I am only when needed, never when celebrated. My worth measured in usefulness, not presence. I fix, carry, solve, then disappear politely. Being useful taught me survival, but being unseen taught me how exhaustion feels. When gratitude never arrives and love sounds conditional, I accept silently. I think that's a pretty powerful poem or piece of work that really speaks to what's probably likely deep down within a lot of us. When we're seen as a human doing instead of a human being. The human doing is, what's the update? Tell me the next thing. The human being, that human being is the person that's speaking this.
And that relationship goes both ways, right? That relationship goes up, down, down, up, side to side, peer to peer, boss to direct report to the boss, whatever that is, right? So I think, in essence, if you can hold that sentiment for human beings, because we all are, like I said, soft, mushy machines inside, feeling machines inside, and that's what we're discovering, and that is one of the reasons why we had this conversation. I'm glad we get to talk about this.
And it's really important that we talk about this. It's something that for all of us, we see it under the surface and starting to bring it up. The best thing for me is there are tools to help. And that's what, if we don't talk about it, we actually never get there. So the tool, Kamala, that you shared in terms of how the sense-making tool, where leaders and groups of people can get on the balcony and actually have these really great conversations about it. I think that's a really great starting point. And at the same time, from an individual point of view, there is so much that we can do in our 4 energy domains: physical, emotional, mental, spiritual. As a group, we can work through those domains as well. And I think when people come together, there is nothing more powerful than that. Adaptive issues require people to all be in the room. And when we come together to actually look at this as a challenge, that it is hard, we acknowledge that. We're in that space as well. When we come together and work through it, that can be super powerful. And I think it's one of those things where it's not just 1 + 1 = 2, but 1 + 1 can equal 3 if we get this right.
I think for me, it's not lost on me as a citizen the important work our clients and our partners are doing in this sphere is helping us transform ourselves and our businesses into something that needs to happen now. Yep. So it's not lost on me how they are protecting us and the critical infrastructure that we rely on when they do this. So the stakes are high. It's, the consequences of getting this wrong are high. And so there's a real acknowledgement at a human level from me at an individual level for them to say, we will do our best to keep exploring ways to help you in you achieving this critical piece of work for us.
Absolutely. Tama?
Yeah, just to reiterate that as leaders, as professionals, let's get onto the balcony every now and then, make it more of a systemic expectation. Let's get on the balcony. It's a requirement, and have those sense making. And that will be a good reminder.
It's been great to be back at Base Camp with both of you. I'm really looking forward to our next one.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Bobby.
Gemma. Thanks, Bobby.
Sarah.